Ben Lee, welcome to Australian Musician.
Thank you so much.
How's your Monday going?
It's good. I have a good ritual. Monday mornings, I go and do infrared sauna and 5 minutes in a cold plunge. So it sort of sets me up for the week.
Okay, sounds scary to me.
Yeah, it's terrifying because it's a real mind over matter thing. It's like your body thinks it's gonna die.
All right.
So just staying calm. I think it's made me braver in other aspects. It's good.
Yeah. I was looking at your Facebook just before, and it looks like you had a fun gig with Fred Armisen last night.
Yeah, I was just going because my friend Georgia Mack from Camp Cope is in town and she sent me a message. She was like, we should go to this because it's this great little guitar shop called Old Style Guitars in Echo Park. That's great. The guy, he makes these guitars that are kind of amazing. Anyway, he has shows in there sometimes and Fred was doing, and as I was walking in, I saw Fred. I've done a gig with him before and he was like, you should get up and do something. And I was like, it was all, he was doing all covers of like The Clash and Kraftwerk. So the whole time I was thinking like, what would I do? And then I remembered I used to cover this song by Dramarama, Anything, Anything. And so I was like, I could do that. Okay. And then I asked him to play guitar so I could hold the lyrics. He's like, you play guitar, I'll hold the lyrics. So that's how we did it.
One of the reasons we're talking to you is because you've got a great new album out called I Am Fun. How did you arrive at that title? And were there many alternative titles?
No, there wasn't really. Like sometimes the title comes pretty early for me. I like titles. With this record, I guess because sort of we're all in this together and Catch My Disease had sort of like propelled my music a little bit back into public consciousness in Australia, particularly. It felt like a chance to almost like reintroduce myself to the public. So I was really conscious of that the record was sort of like it should contain my thesis for being as an artist, you know. So a lot of the songs like Born for This Bullshit and the I'm Fun, they're songs that are about, they're sort of almost like philosophies, you know.
Yeah, it was a lockdown project, wasn't it? You couldn't get out and
Yeah, yeah, I was going to do it live with a band and stuff, but and then I sort of put it aside. And then, you know, like everyone, I went, okay, we got to do this somehow. And it was great because it ended up mainly the reason I love collaborating on records is because as a solo artist, I don't have that band thing where I naturally have openness to other people's ideas and stuff. Like I just don't get challenged in that way. So you have to orchestrate that as a solo artist. Otherwise it can get like too controlling.
yeah.
So it was great just having all these, and I'd email files off, and then I'd wake up and there'd be something in a Dropbox, and I'd be like, "Whoa, this is totally different to what I pictured. I love it." And then you kind of go from there.
Yeah, there are a lot of collaborations on the album, mostly females. Sally Seltmann, Megan Washington, Zooey Deschanel, Georgia Mack. Um, do you find that your voice goes better with female voices?
I don't know. I think it was just I grew up with two sisters, and like just in a house of very powerful women. So I've always felt very comfortable with powerful women. Like it's sort of just who I gravitate towards. And I've had great collaborations with men too, but there's something very easy for me about collaborating with women.
Yeah. The album, and as we said, was recorded during the pandemic. Something that happened almost immediately when the pandemic hit was that people turned to your song "We're All in This Together" as sort of a comfort thing, I suppose. So were you aware that that was happening at the time?
It's sort of like it hit me in stages. Like it would be like a few social media posts and then politicians quoting it. And then it sort of built and built until I was like, I'm hearing like there are radio stations playing it every hour and stuff. And I was like, okay, wait, this is now like a thing. So yeah, it was interesting.
When you're writing, are you good at knowing when a song is done and to leave it alone?
Yeah, I think I am. I think my main, and I've had varying degrees of completion with things, you know, obviously over 30 years of making records and everything. But I think the best feeling is when I'm proud of sort of every line and every section in a song. But sometimes you get just like, uh, you sort of cringe your way through your own, and then you just move on to the next line because you're lazy. But when I feel proud of every line, every section, it's not like I'm not playing it for someone. By the time I get to the second chorus, I'm like, you get the idea. That's not a good sign, you know? Yeah, to me, that's kind of when it's done.
Yeah. What about track order? How important is that to you?
I take it pretty seriously. I mean, it's a different art than when I started, because we used to work in, you know, side A and side B, even like when you started in the early 90s, because obviously things are much more front loaded now. But I've tried to incorporate that into when I do track orders and still have a flow and a journey to it. Like, you can't help it. Like, if you have weaker songs, you put them near the back. That's just how it goes. And there's always relative weakness because it's like not every song could be the best song on a record, you know? But at the same time, I still like when I go deep with an artist, I play an album all the way through. So I still do running order like that, I guess.
Yeah. Did anything happen during the making of I'm Fun that you'll take into the next project? Maybe a mental note, a grand idea, or a collaboration you might want to take further?
Well, I'm scheduled to go into the studio at the end of February, so I kind of know what I'm going to do. I guess, yeah. I don't know if it was the making of the album. Well, firstly, I think I've always been really concerned with, well, I call it the casting of an album, like a movie, you know, casting all the parts. I always liked when like directors acknowledge how important casting is, and that with casting, if you get it right, you actually don't need to give that much instruction. And I sort of feel the same with musicians, that if you hire the right drummer, you barely need to tell them what to do. It's like, it's just the right person, you know? So, but with this album, I was conscious of, it was actually an organic extension of where I'm at in my life and my relationships, but I really loved bridging generations of my type of artists, like kind of alternative, a bit quirky, smart, you know, and like having people like John Bryan and Shamir or Money Mark and Christian Lee Hudson. And like, to me, that's because that's my passion. My passion is both, I think like you got to go down and up at the same time, you know, like your roots and always staying in touch with what the next generation of like radical sort of thinkers in pop music are doing. So I definitely want to carry that forward, but also just really leaning into an acceptance of myself as a pop songwriter. I think even if, and I don't mean that from a sense of every song has to be like a hit radio song, but more like a power pop perspective where every song is really fun and inspiring, even if it's heartbreaking, and has a great energy. And, you know, just, I don't know, just the years of just refinement of the process, I guess.
Yeah. Do you enjoy the process of transferring the recorded product to a live situation? Is that one of your fave parts of being an artist?
Yeah, well, I've only recently started thinking about my live show. I mean, it's so funny. I'm like really behind my peers in this sense that I always, when I would make a new project, a new album, I would then conceptualize how to deliver that from scratch, 100%. And then I realized like, oh, all these artists that are my peers that I've some of them I have like more success, like with songs on the radio and everything. They've built a better touring experience and stuff because they look at the touring thing as separate and they're building the show all the time, adding to it. And I'm trying that at the moment a little bit. Like I'm kind of building something that, because you know, I've got probably like 9 or 10 songs that if I play a festival, almost the whole crowd knows them, even if they don't know they're by me. And I realized to not show up and play a set like that is almost like, I don't just mean business wise. I mean like at like an emotional level. It's like denying people fundamentally what they want and need. And so I'm just starting to think more about the show as an ongoing beast that continues to grow and build on itself.
Yeah, you've got some gigs coming up, one in LA and one in New York.
Yeah.
Are they solo shows or with a band?
No, I've got a band, but I've sort of, this is part of the way I've built the show, where I can kind of plug musicians in when I go somewhere, because we've got some tracks and we've got props and we've got visual stuff and all this stuff that, like, the show, in a sense, it's like a show in a box, in a sense. It's a few boxes, but but the point of it is that, like, I want to have that modular quality where I'm still like an artist. I can travel, I can go do it inexpensively, and I can find local people. So actually my the rhythm section is my wife's little brother and his friend. So they're both in their mid-20s and they're going to be my rhythm section. And then it's kind of hitting this balance between trying to, like, upgrade the show and make it exciting, but at the same time, it's so expensive touring now. I'm sure you've heard everything going on, that, like, it's just trying to strike this balance of over delivering the show, but not bankrupting yourself in the process.
Yeah. So what were the toys that you used in recording the album, and does that have an effect on the live situation?
Well, it's quite interesting because I sort of recorded guitar and vocal here at my house, and which I just have a little, basic Pro Tools Apogee Duet, just 2 channels. And I recorded guitar and vocals to click, and then I would send them off to people. So a lot of the toys that would be used on it, I'm actually not aware of. I would then have another layer of experience when it came back. And things like, I'd been really into Tom Waits the last 4 or 5 years, and particularly, like, Bone Machine onwards. So I built an amazing junk drum kit that you can hear on a bunch of the songs. So that would be like, I would get the drums back from Joey Waronker, and then I would lay on another percussion track. So that was sort of unique. But yeah, it was, and then it's just sort of like, the tools are funny because they're like, you can buy all this stuff and have stuff. But for instance, there's a song, My Adventure, and we had it tracked and everything. And I was like, I want it to feel more like a collage, when we were, like, doing vocals and stuff in Bondi with Justin Stanley at the very end when I was bringing it all together. And I said, I just want this section to sound like it was recorded on an iPhone. And so we were like, okay, let's go. So I went and sat at the piano. We put the iPhone there and then recorded guitar and vocals for that chorus and then plugged it in. And it was a great example of how the tools were whatever was available. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. In some photos I've seen, you've been sporting a Dirty Elvis guitar.
Yeah.
Tell me how you come across that brand, and tell me about your guitar.
Yeah, so that after, when the album was coming out, or when I just started touring, I think, I was just starting to tour it in Australia. Matt, his name's Matt, right? Yeah, Matt. I'm always communicating with him through the Dirty Elvis Instagram, so I never call him by his name. But Matt reached out to me and he was like, hey, I've started building guitars. Oh, this is probably 6 months before. It was like, could I build you a guitar? And that's the kind of thing you just don't say no to, because worst case scenario, you get something that's crap and you politely accept it and then you never use it. Best case scenario, you get something like what happened here, where this guitar actually solved a whole lot of problems that I hadn't even really identified yet. So the guitar is, I guess feel wise, it's kind of most like kind of a Dan Electro or something like that, where it's loud and strummy. And because acoustic guitar has been such a staple of my songwriting and of my recording process, but I knew I wanted to play electric, I hadn't figured out what that looked like exactly. And then as soon as Matt gave me the Dirty Elvis, I was like, wow, this works, because it's plucky enough that it really sounds like it could be a treated acoustic or something, but then you can fuzz it out and do amazing distortions and stuff on it. So it weirdly kind of like opened up. It just was like the perfect guitar. You know how guitars are? It's such a magical process. I actually had a guitar stolen recently, and it's a guitar, it's an SG, a 71 SG that I bought when I was 19 years old. And the headstock had snapped. It had happened once 15 years ago. It happens with SG necks because they're so thin. And I had it in the car because I'd taken it somewhere to get it looked at about a repair. And then the car was stolen. And it's funny how, yes, there's the tragedy of losing a guitar, but there's also, I always have with guitars, they're like, it's a very cosmic thing, like what brings guitars that you connect with into your life and also what takes them away. And so just coming back to the Dirty Elvis, it just felt like this guitar landing in my hands was like, it was just like the right person for the job.
Yeah. Pretty interesting looking guitar visually as well.
Yeah, it's funny. It's like I've shown it to a bunch of people and it's got a real wow factor. Like I remember like I opened it up and like showed Fred Armisen the guitar. He was like, whoa. When someone says they're building you a guitar, you don't expect that because it's sort of got like a Les Paul kind of body. I mean, it's a cool guitar, man. It's a really cool guitar.
Yeah. Does a new guitar bring out a rush of creativity? Are there immediate melodies in new guitars in general?
There can be. There can be. I think for me, more with this, it was like, it was just a real, because I've just been getting so much back into playing electric guitar that it just really was like confirmation. And I think that affected a lot of the new songs I've written that are going to be on the next album, because they're all essentially they're either written on electric or on my mate and 12 string that I got when I was in Melbourne a few years back. And that also brought out, 12 string brings out a whole different type of melody and song. So yeah, I'd say the guitars really do influence you when you're writing.
Yeah. So how are you approaching your set list for these shows coming up? How much of the new album will you play?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of doing like, I think 3 band songs and then maybe another one solo, mixed in with all old songs. And it is funny, like when you've got a big catalog to deal with, you kind of get into reality and say, wow, when I make a new album, unless it is so successful that it dwarfs like 30 years in my catalog, I'll probably be taking 2 songs or 3 songs from the set and folding them into my larger set. And it's kind of funny because part of me is still, I don't know, maybe every musician's like this, but I always sort of feel like it's my first record. And I sort of always am like in that energy of looking forward to presenting the record as a whole. But there's sometimes there's opportunities to do that, but it's mostly 2 or 3 songs.
Yeah. Are you looking to bring that show to Australia?
Yeah, I've come and I've done it a few times. I did Caloundra Festival and I did a festival at Airlie Beach, and it's going to just keep evolving. There's a bunch of stuff on the calendar for next year. So I look at it now as kind of like, I don't know. I know for sort of publicity, you have to promote tours to do with records or whatever, but I just view it as like, I'm ready to be booked. You know what I mean? Like, I'll jump on a plane and play a show. Like, it's just about making it all financially feasible, but I want to just make it this continual thing. Like a lot of the artists I love, touring is its own sacred sort of experience and the relationship with the crowd and everything. So.
Yeah. One of the other things you've been doing recently is a podcast with your wife called Weirder Together. It seems like you could be just sitting at home in the lounge talking, and at some point you push record. How much thought goes into those shows?
Well, I usually make a few notes. We're lucky that we lead interesting lives. So generally there's a few things that have happened that week that can spur a conversation. But it's not even really what the content is that has been the learning curve. It's more like I'm doing all the editing, right? So I just got to a point where I was like, we have to do this like live radio because otherwise I'm editing the shit out of this thing and it's taking me all day. So I said, let's try and basically do half an hour without stopping and without losing momentum. And that's because we have no problem talking to each other, but like anyone, we go through periods where it goes quiet and everything. So the real thing for us has been getting into the zone of like hitting record and really going for it and getting in a rhythm for half an hour.
Yeah. You're an Australian artist. You spend a lot of time in Australia, but you also spend a lot of time in LA and become quite the LA guy at times. Um, what's the latest LA fad?
Um, I don't know. I mean, my daughter probably knows more about that. But the thing I like about LA is my penchant for uh, I just love connecting with creative people. It's why I got into the business. Like I if I wasn't playing music, I'd be doing something where I get nourished by creative people's inspiration and energy. So I just love just the amount of ideas. A lot of them are terrible. There's a lot of delusional people, but I love that you can just tap into being here. It's like, it's a city full of dreamers, and some of them are walking into a nightmare they're not even aware of, but it's pretty inspiring.
But when you go out to a cafe or a restaurant, what's the main difference between conversations going around you in LA as opposed to, say, Sydney or Melbourne?
Well, it's probably more like if you're in Newcastle and you're going to hear people who are involved in the mining industry talking or so. You know what I mean? Like it's an industry town.
Hmm.
So it's it's just it's part of the fabric of it. Like for better or worse, in some ways I think people growing up here have a very demystified concept about show business because it doesn't have some of the glamour to it. Um, yeah, it's interesting. It's just the mechanics of the whole process and the politics and all of that are just the fabric of how the city works.
Yeah. Another thing that you recently did was some music to accompany a book by Tom Robbins, B is for Beer, which I believe is going to become a film.
Well, we've been trying, but honestly, it's like I think it's just too weird, and it got to a point where I think the reality with taking money from people to do things is that you then have a responsibility to them to get them their money back, at least if you don't get them a profit. And I just think the inherent nature of this story, it's about a little girl stealing her dad's beer and getting drunk for the first time at 8 years old. And I think there are issues with telling that story commercially that are unconquerable. In the sense of on a large scale, we could do it with a book, you can do it with an album, but in order to get $200,000 together, which is a tiny movie, and to make it, you still have to have some sense that it will come out, and it will. And I just think it's a problem I haven't been able to solve so far. I'm open to it for the future.
Yeah. Your father-in-law is Donovan Leitch, the legendary songwriter from the 60s, although he's been making music ever since. Have you two ever collaborated?
We've done little things like he sang some backing vocals on a song of mine called Happiness, and we've jammed and stuff, but we've never really like done any like writing or anything like that.
Yeah. And what are your thoughts on the new album?
I like his record. I really like it. He just sent it to us the other night. Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, he really is connected to that sort of Celtic mythology and stuff. So that's really like his spiritual center when he's dealing with that. And I just think you can hear it in the music. It really sounds ancient in a way.
Yeah. What about bucket list projects? Things in the back of your mind that have been there forever that you want to get to one day?
It's kind of weird because as I'm moving forward in my career, I find myself more like in service of what's the best thing for the project rather than like what's my what do I want to get out of something? So if I collaborate with someone, I'm less likely to force my ideas into it. And I'm sort of like, well, how can I help you make the thing you want to make? So in some ways, to be in that space means I can't really have a bucket list. Like, I just want to continue to work with brilliant people and do whatever's necessary in those projects to make them as good as they can be.
Yeah. Well, Ben Lee, it's been great to catch up, and we look forward to seeing you back in Australia soon.
Great to talk to you too.